Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by the following: IU Health Southern Indiana physicians, primary care and specialty care providers now accepting new patients in Bloomington and throughout South Central Indiana. siphysicians.org. The IU School of Education, preparing teachers, scholars, and administrators to improve teaching and learning in Indiana and around the world. More at education.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. Indiana's growing livestock industry is impacting the entire state's economy.
Most of the major companies, whether it be the pork or the poultry side, and even the dairy families, they're born and raised here.
Business is booming, but at what expense? That's next. Plans for completion of I-69 are taking shape. Ahead, a look at the latest construction plans. These young pilots refuse to let their disabilities define them.
You're really self-reliant, and that's the big point of the Able Flight program, and this program is the self-reliance despite your disability.
How the Able Flight program is helping people get off the ground and opening up their world. We go for a flight next. These stories, plus the latest news headlines from across the state, right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. The animal agriculture industry in Indiana is growing faster than the nation as a whole in most categories. A recent report from the Indiana Soybean Alliance says that's good news for Indiana's economy. But as Becca Costello reports, some Hoosiers say the consequences outweigh the benefits.
So yes, all of our cows have names.
Andy Tower operates a small farm in west central Indiana.
So my wife and I actually built our house here on the farm 8 years ago, but really this farm has been a part of my family since the late 1800s.
He also represents the Indiana Soybean Alliance, where he primarily works with livestock farmers around the state. The organization worked with the Indiana Business Research Center this year on a report that determined Indiana is outpacing the nation's animal agriculture growth in every major category. For example, turkey production declined 11% in the U.S., but increased 45% in Indiana. Indiana is among the nation's top producers of turkey, hogs, and eggs. But Tower says the most important finding of the report is that this growth isn't just good for farmers.
So the impact of the entire state economy is pretty large. Because you start to figure in, not only the increase in economic activity at the individual farm level, but then that creates opportunities in the trucking industry, the feed industry, all the different service industries, plumbing, electric, those type, and then all the way down to the processing.
It's what's called a ripple effect, with a relatively small livestock operation indirectly boosting all aspects of the local economy.
Agriculture is something that we can generate more economic development. And there's a reason to focus on agriculture because we have the natural resource base right here. Everyone wants to be the next Silicon Valley, but why would Indiana be the next Silicon Valley?
Hurt says this kind of growth is ideal for Indiana because it's bringing jobs to places where there just aren't many other options.
The large-scale animal operation has economic benefits. It has benefits in helping drive our cost of our basic food ingredients down. It creates opportunities in economic development and employment in rural areas where it's really hard to attract the next major employer to come into that community.
But when we talk about livestock operations, we're usually not talking about Tower's idyllic farm with less than 20 cows. Instead, the Soybean Alliance report refers primarily to confined feeding operations, or CFOs. These are farms with a large number of animals in one place. Indiana has close to 2,000 CFOs. Operations with a higher number of animals are called concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs. Both are regulated by the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, which enforces regulations about what farms do with all that manure, how close they can be to water sources, public roads, and more. But for some Hoosiers who live next to a CFO or CAFO, it's not enough regulation. Nancy Banta lives near a CAFO in Bartholomew County. Earlier this year, Banta and other homeowners successfully lobbied the county to charge them less in property taxes because the value of their homes is decreased by the CAFO.
My quality of life, I had to rethink everything about it. I can no longer think about my grandchildren over here to play because of that.
As for an economic boost, Banta says the CAFOs aren't bringing in jobs. Instead, they're taking advantage of a vulnerable community.
It truly is all about economics. It truly is, there is no money here. We are the poorest township in Bartholomew County. That essentially is the bottom line, is why they're here. Because they're not going to be able to push back in any way. They don't have the means to push back. They don't have any representation in any kind of county government that's going to look out for them. They're an easy target.
But Tower says the farmers running CFOs or CAFOs are mostly Hoosiers who have farmed here for generations.
These farm families that are expanding into animal agriculture, they're invested right there in the community along with the neighbors. And so they're not going to do something that's going to be detrimental to them that will also be detrimental to that community.
Tower says negative public perception is fueled by uncertainty because letting people see the big operations in person risks exposing the animals to disease. He hopes the Indiana Soybean Alliance report will help put people at ease about livestock farming. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Becca Costello.
A bill to streamline the permitting process for CAFOs died in the Senate this year. State lawmakers are considering regulations for CAFOs in a summer study committee. Becca Costello joins us now to talk more about what options are on the table. So tell us about this recent bill and then why it didn't make it to a full vote.
So Republican Representative David Wilkins from Wabash introduced this bill in the House, and it would have just tweaked that permitting process for CFOs and for CAFOs. For example, in some cases, it would have made it easier to expand an existing livestock operation without getting a new permit. Now, it did pass in the House, and it was sent to the Senate for a vote, but it died in a Senate committee without a hearing. A lot of lawmakers said the bill's language was confusing, and Senate President David Long actually called it bad legislation.
So then what are lawmakers considering in this study committee?
So in this summer study committee right now, they're considering the same topics. And so they're going to hear from all the parties, and then they could make recommendations to the full General Assembly about what actions to take next legislative session. So far, they've heard about the state's current CAFO permitting process, and the Indiana Soybean Alliance actually presented this report to them at the last meeting, which was in August.
So as you reported, this issue is really close to property owners. We saw how emotional that one lady got. Are they going to have an opportunity to weigh in on this discussion?
Yes. So at the summer study committee, they will be hearing public testimony at the next meeting. That meeting is Monday, September 19th at the State House. So that's a chance for people like Nancy Banta, who we heard from, to express their concerns about CAFOs and really tell lawmakers what they want to happen with CAFOs moving forward.
All right. Becca, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Fewer residents and businesses along the proposed stretch of I-69 from Martinsville to Indianapolis are going to be relocated. The Indiana Department of Transportation presented the new plans to the public during a series of meetings this week.
The final section of Interstate 69 will still follow the route of existing State Road 37 as planned, but the Indiana Department of Transportation made changes to access roads, overpasses, and the right-of-way as the result of previous feedback from residents. The new plans mean fewer than half of the people and businesses who were originally told they would have to relocate will ultimately have to.
We were looking at over 600 relocations. Now with these refinements, we're down to 271.
More than 200 people came out to learn more about the revised plans during one of the meetings in Martinsville this week. While some residents say they're not thrilled about the changes, many are happy with the revised route.
This is probably the best thing that they could come up with and for our area.
Funding for the final leg of I-69 still has to be secured. It's remained a concern because of financial issues and delays that plagued Section 5 of I-69, which runs from Bloomington to Martinsville. The state took that project over from a private developer over the summer. INDOT says it has enough funding to get work on Section 6 started and will seek out more money as the work unfolds.
From State Road 39 to about 1 mile north of State Road 44, we will have funding for some of the pre-development work through Martinsville.
INDOT plans to start construction on the final leg of the interstate by 2020. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Barbara Brozier.
The state's draft environmental impact statement predicts Section 6 will cost $1.5 billion. Now for headlines, we go over to Barbara Brozier, who has the latest on this week's top stories.
Thanks, Joe. Well, Terre Haute is dominating local headlines again this week. There's a lot going on as the city and county both debate ways to cut their budgets. The city needs to reduce an $8 million deficit. Then there's the issue with the jail and a contract the city made with the sludge drying contract a couple of years ago. So let's go to Terre Haute. At the heart of each of these issues really is money. Now, Terre Haute residents got their first chance last night to give feedback on the proposed 2018 budget. It includes some specific cuts, but primarily focuses on increasing revenue, reallocating funds from other departments to the general fund, delaying loan repayments, and raising taxes.
But above all, remember this little thing I've learned, and I think you've learned it too. Small things do matter, so always take that in consideration.
The city hired municipal financial advisor Umbaugh & Associates to help come up with a 5-year plan. It included the option of increasing taxes to reduce the deficit and build cash reserves, but that didn't get much support.
Those other options are just not real attractive to me. They're not appealing in a way that I want to pursue any of them. If there is no public safety law, then we may have to kind of look at some things, but definitely not the wheel tax. So that's one that wouldn't be interested in creating a new one just for the city of Terre Haute when we're already paying one to the county.
But it looks like some tax increase will be difficult to avoid. Here's what's on the table. Vigo County, not the city, is looking at a proposal that includes a 0.6% public safety tax increase and a 0.25% income tax hike. Now, the revenue collected from increased county taxes will help with the city's budget deficit because it will flow from one entity to the other.
Why would I be supportive of taxing those people an extra 1%, anybody in the community for that matter, an extra 1% of their pay to give a fire department just a measly $80,000, where the city of Terre Haute, with that $20 million bring-in, will get almost $5 million.
The 0.25% income tax hike would be used to fund a new county jail. Once the jail's been paid for, the tax would go away. Disagreements about the need for the jail, the size, and the cost continue to stall the project.
There hasn't been, to my mind, a good case for why we need to spend so much money and have the capacity to lock up so many more people and use my tax money and everybody else's tax money to do so.
Now, there's a lot of tension, not just between the city and the county, but in particular between the mayor and everyone else. The council is still stewing because they only recently learned that the state ordered the city to eliminate its deficit this year. And this week, the city, the Board of Public Works, and the wastewater utility were named in a pay-to-play lawsuit. It has to do with a sludge-to-diesel contract the city entered into. Bennett, at the time, thought it was what the city needed to help it get out of debt. The deal failed, and it's made Terre Haute's situation worse.
I think there's a lot of mistrust out for the government, so I hope that the FBI and these lawsuits can be settled quickly so we can move about making our city grow.
The County Council is meeting Monday to vote on the income tax hike, and the City Council has another budget meeting scheduled Wednesday. And Joe, I know this is an issue that you've sat down and talked to Mayor Bennett about several times.
Yes, I did this week, and I know you mentioned this at the top of that part of the story of Terre Haute today, but half of that $8 million, $4 million, is going to be covered by some healthy reserves in other places. The other half is a loan, but that's just extended to next year. The state is okay with this, but it's going to be interesting to see how they make all that up next year.
A lot to keep our eyes on.
Thank you, Barbara. Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk, we'll have more headlines from across the state. Get ready for takeoff. It requires innovation and hard work, but a program at Purdue is giving students with disabilities a chance to earn their wings. These stories and more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
10,000.
15? 15, you think?
20, 21,000?
600.
20. 18.5.
24.
It's at least 40.
Look at it.
4,500,000.
650.
20.
650.
This textile would be worth about $500,000.
$500,000?
No way.
I knew it's just a blanket.
Laying on the back of a chair. Well, sir, you have a national treasure.
Wow.
A national treasure. Congratulations.
I can't believe this.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. Scott County is joining a growing list of entities suing 2 drug manufacturing companies the county alleges contributed to its ongoing opioid epidemic. Barbara Brosier has more on that story and other headlines from across the state.
Joe, the complaint claims that opioid manufacturers Purdue Pharma and Endo Pharmaceuticals overstated the benefits of opioids for treatment of chronic pain and denied the high risk of addiction associated with opioids. Scott County made national headlines in 2015 when opioid abuse there sparked an unprecedented outbreak of HIV. Attorney Bob Houston is representing Scott County. He says the lawsuit targets Purdue and Endo specifically because the county believes the drugs they manufacture contributed to the ongoing opioid epidemic in the area.
The reason for the suit is the devastating nature of what's happened in our county, almost compared with any place else in the world per capita.
Purdue Pharma issued a statement denying the allegations in the suit. Monroe County Community Schools is ending its agreement with corporate bus fleet Auxilio on October 13th. The district outsourced some of its bus routes to the Michigan-based company because of a bus driver shortage. Parents have repeatedly criticized the decision, and the issue came to a head when there were widespread issues with the routes the first week of school. Now MCCSC will have to cover the 42 routes Auxilio handles. Bartholomew County is moving forward with a tax hike that would help fund additional deputies at the jail. Sheriff Matt Myers says a recent change in state law means dozens of people that would have previously gone to the State Department of Corrections are now being housed at the county level, contributing to an ongoing overcrowding problem.
Hopefully with this passing tonight, we can get the appropriate staffing that we need to maintain the jail and also have some treatment options and programs for the inmates.
The County Council passed a preliminary proposal for a half-cent income tax increase. It faces a second vote next month. Myers says the additional revenue will allow him to hire 5 new deputies and reopen an unused section of the jail to house additional inmates. Indiana Supreme Court will consider whether the state can execute prisoners with the previously unused 3-drug combination. A Court of Appeals ruling in June effectively halted lethal injections in Indiana. A date hasn't been set for the court to hear arguments. Indiana hasn't executed an inmate since 2009. The debate over whether grocery and convenience stores should be able to sell cold beer raged on at the State House this week. A legislative panel examining the state's alcohol laws heard testimony on both sides of the issue. Supporters of the change say it would allow convenience stores to adapt to a changing market.
Change is bad, and I understand that. However, it's not fair to have a legal monopoly and for the legislature to choose winners and losers in business.
The convenience store chain Rickers sparked this year's debate when it secured restaurant permits that allow cold beer and hard liquor for carryout. Some opponents to the change say selling cold beer in more places would lead to increased crime. An Evansville casino is the first of Indiana's 10 riverboats to move onto land under a new state law. Tropicana Evansville will open its onshore facility next month after being in its riverboat location since 1995. And Joe, a lot of casinos pushed for this change because they said if we move on land, we'll be able to compete more with other states who have on-land casinos.
Barbara, thank you very much. And now we go to Purdue University, the only place in the state where people with disabilities can learn how to fly. It's opportunity many of these students never thought possible. The students spend time in the classroom and using a virtual simulator before they're introduced to the open skies. Sophia Salaby has the story.
The runway at the Purdue University Airport is crowded. Students are inspecting planes and mechanics are working on maintenance. There's a constant stream of planes taking off and landing. Wesley Major is our pilot. He's been flying for 5 years now.
I have not flown a plane before my accident, and was the unique aspect of the Able Flight program because I didn't have anything to kind of relate it to.
In 2008, Major was in a motorcycle accident and now has paraplegia. During recovery, his mentor, another graduate of Able Flight, introduced him to the program.
During the rehab process, I focused a lot on what I cannot do. I can't play hockey anymore. I can't go up steps. I can't run. I can't. Woe is me, so to speak. And then the Able Flight program kind of did the opposite. It opened the doors to what you're capable of actually doing.
All Able Flight pilots train on a small sport aircraft that is modified for each individual user. For Major, all he has to do is add an additional handle to his controls.
So this is the T handle, and this is what I use to control the rudder, which was normally controlled by a person's feet. T handle goes in super quick, comes out super quick.
The T-handle allows Major to do things with his hands that a pilot without disabilities would do with his feet.
Some of it's very simple. We don't redesign anything, but it does get other people thinking, and we've had a couple of engineers start looking at how to do hand controls for a variety of different airplanes.
Purdue aviation professor Bernie Woolley oversees the program and says Able Flight participants are treated just like any other person. They have the same requirements any pilot would need to get certified.
It's a very intensive program. They are going through basically the same thing as a private pilot would here. And most private pilots take about 4 to 6 months, and they've got to do it within 6 weeks.
Over the years, the program has hosted people with paraplegia and quadriplegia, people who are deaf, and even someone with diabetes. Ray Martinio always wanted to fly, but he could never get a certified flight instructor or CFI to take him on as a student. Tinio is deaf, and he finally got his chance to fly when he received a scholarship from Able Flight 2 years ago. He uses several methods to communicate with the air traffic control tower. Woolley says the first time his students fly by themselves is one of the most important parts of the summer. He remembers Tinio's first solo flight.
And everybody's sitting there kind of, and it worked out great.
As a Purdue student, Tinio researches how to make flying more accessible for deaf pilots like himself. Since the program, he's gone on to earn his private pilot certificate and hopes to one day be a professional pilot. And are people surprised to find out he can fly? Tinio and Major are just two of the more than 50 people with disabilities that have graduated from Able Flight at Purdue. The program will welcome its 8th class of students next summer. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Sophia Salaby.
More than 50 people with disabilities have graduated from the program in the 7 years since it was introduced at the university. Woolley is set to retire within the next 2 years, but the program will continue. The university selected Major, who had never considered being able to fly, as the next director of the Able Flight program. Able Flight will welcome its next class of students next summer. Well, it's National POW Missing in Action Recognition Day, a day to remember the tens of thousands of Americans who never returned from overseas conflicts. Miranda Fulmore reports on how Hoosier soldiers are being honored.
Dozens gathered for an outdoor ceremony at Crane Naval Base to celebrate the lives of prisoners of war and those missing in action. Among them were the family members of those taken captive.
You have to have a lot of patience to live with the next POW and a lot of understanding.
Naomi Summerlot's husband, Ray Summerlot, was abducted in France and remained a POW for 7.5 months in northern Germany during World War II. She says it's important to celebrate National POW MIA Recognition Day because it honors the legacies of those impacted.
They risk their lives for what they believed in, for our freedom, and some of them gave their lives.
Simmerlot says it was her husband's commitment to serving the United States is what kept him alive during his time as a POW.
That he gave everything he had for the principles that we believe in.
More than 83,000 Americans remain missing from previous conflict. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Miranda Fulmore.
And that's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. We leave you with more from that POW ceremony and the playing of taps. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by the following: IU Health Southern Indiana physicians, primary care and specialty care providers now accepting new patients in Bloomington and throughout South Central Indiana. siphysicians.org. The IU School of Education, preparing teachers, scholars, and administrators to improve teaching and learning in Indiana and around the world. More at education.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.